The look on my mother-in-law's face when she said it was almost worse than the words themselves. She had that particular smile, the one she always wore when she was being condescending and wanted everyone around her to think she was being generous. Teeth showing. Eyes not quite matching. She put her hand lightly on the arm of her friend, this woman named Dolores who I'd never met, and she said, "And this is Audrey, she works security. You know, at one of those office buildings downtown. Not my son's wife. Not Audrey, who has a master's degree. Not even just Audrey. She works security." I was standing right there holding a glass of sparkling cider because I was 7 weeks pregnant and hadn't told anyone yet, and I smiled the way I'd been trained to smile. Controlled, neutral, revealing nothing. And I said, "Nice to meet you, Dolores." My husband, Nathan, was across the room talking to his brother. He hadn't heard. He never heard when his mother did things like that. Or maybe he heard and decided not to hear. I was never sure which was worse. The party was a retirement celebration for my father-in-law, held at the family's house in Naperville, this big colonial on a cul-de-sac with a 3-car garage and a kitchen. My mother-in-law had renovated twice in 8 years. There were maybe 40 people there, mostly his colleagues from the firm, some neighbors, a few relatives I recognized, and several I didn't. White tablecloths on rented tables in the backyard. Caterers from a place in the western suburbs that did a lot of events like this. Everything very clean, very coordinated, very much about appearances. I had driven myself because I'd gotten off work late. That was the other thing my mother-in-law liked to mention. That I kept irregular hours. "You never know when Audrey's going to be around," she'd say. Like my absence from family dinners was a character flaw rather than a job requirement. She didn't know what my job actually required. Nobody in that family did, except Nathan, and he only knew the version I was allowed to tell him. I work for a federal agency. I have since I was 26. Before that I was in the Army, 2 deployments, then came home and spent 18 months trying to figure out what to do with a body that had been trained to stay alert in environments most people would never encounter, and a mind that had trouble sitting still in a quiet room. A recruiter found me. I didn't find them. That's usually how it goes. What I do specifically is threat assessment and protective intelligence. I work in a unit that operates mostly in the background. We don't make arrests, we don't carry warrants, we're not the people who show up on the news. We identify threats before they become events. That's the simplest way I can explain it to someone without clearance, and it's also about as specific as I can get. My cover, for the purposes of people who don't need to know more, is exactly what my mother-in-law said at that party. I work security for a private firm. It's not entirely untrue. It just leaves out about 90% of the reality. So I smiled at Dolores and I set my cider down on a nearby table, and I excused myself to find the bathroom I didn't actually need to use, and I stood in the hallway bathroom of my in-laws' house for about 4 minutes just breathing. This was not the worst thing my mother-in-law had ever said to me. It wasn't even close. There had been the comment 2 Christmases ago about how it was such a shame I hadn't been able to finish my doctorate. I have a master's. I was never pursuing a doctorate. She simply decided that narrative made more sense for whatever point she was making. There had been the time she told Nathan, within my earshot, that she worried about what kind of mother I would be given my lifestyle. The time she asked, at Easter, whether I'd considered transitioning into something with more stability, more of a future, something where I could be more present. Each time, I said nothing. Not because I was weak, because I had learned, a long time before I met Nathan's mother, that most battles are won by the person who controls the most information. And I had significantly more information than she did. I washed my hands, dried them on one of the linen hand towels she keeps out for company, and went back outside. The afternoon moved the way those afternoons do, slowly, with a lot of standing around, a lot of conversations I was adjacent to, but not quite part of. I talked to my father-in-law for a while, which was always easier. He's a quiet man, genuinely kind, proud of his career but not arrogant about it. He asked about my work and I gave him the version I give everyone, and he nodded and said it sounded demanding, and I said it had its moments. Around 4 o'clock, my phone buzzed in my pocket. Not a call. A specific vibration pattern. 3 short, 1 long, that I had set up 18 months ago and had felt maybe a dozen times since. It meant not urgent, but soon. I excused myself from the conversation I was in. Nathan's aunt was telling me about a kitchen renovation she was considering, and I extracted myself with what I hope was reasonable grace. and I walked to the far end of the yard near the fence and checked the notification. There was a name, a location, a time window. The name was someone I had spent 8 months building a file on. A man in his early 50s who had been coordinating financial transfers to 3 different cells operating in the Midwest. We'd been tracking him for almost 2 years across 2 different task forces. He was careful. Genuinely careful. Not the kind of careful that's just paranoid, but the kind that comes from experience. And every time we'd gotten close to something actionable, he'd moved or changed his pattern or the paperwork had stalled somewhere. The location was a hotel 11 minutes from where I was standing. The time window was closing. I stood there for a moment with the phone in my hand and the sounds of a retirement party behind me. Someone laughing, the clink of glasses, my mother-in-law's voice cutting through everything the way it always did. And I did the calculus that I've learned to do quickly and without sentiment. I typed my acknowledgement. I put the phone back in my pocket. Then I went to find Nathan. He was in the kitchen getting a beer, and when I came in, he could tell immediately that something had shifted. He's always been good at reading me, which is one of the things I love about him, and occasionally one of the things that makes my job more complicated. "Everything okay?" he said. "Work thing," I said. He looked at me for a moment the way he does sometimes. Not suspicious, just searching, and then he nodded. We've had this conversation in various forms over 5 years of marriage. He's never pushed too hard. I think he's decided he trusts me even when he doesn't fully understand, which requires a certain kind of security that I don't take for granted. "How long?" he said. "I don't know. I'll text you. My mom's gonna notice you're gone." "Your mom notices everything that can be converted into evidence against me," I said. And he almost smiled. "I'll tell her there was an emergency at the office. She'll think I'm lying. She thinks that anyway," he said, and this time he did smile. Small and a little tired, and he kissed me once and let me go. I got my jacket from the front closet without stopping to explain anything to anyone. I heard my mother-in-law's voice from somewhere near the back door. She was telling someone about the caterers, about how she'd specifically requested the salmon to be prepared a particular way, and I walked out through the front without interrupting. In my car, I made the call that confirmed my involvement, put the address into navigation, and was at the hotel in 9 minutes. I won't go into what happened in that hotel in any specific detail. What I can say is that it involved 3 of us. I met 2 colleagues in the parking structure, and a conversation that we'd been waiting a very long time to have. And by 6:30 that evening we had what we needed, and the situation was no longer a situation. No weapons discharged, no civilians involved. The kind of outcome that doesn't make good television but is the best possible result for everyone. I was back in my car by 7. I sat in the parking structure for a few minutes and let my nervous system do what it needed to do. I've learned not to rush that part. I ate a granola bar from the emergency stash I keep in my glove compartment. I checked in with Nathan via text. Heading back, maybe 30 min, and then I sat there in the quiet and thought about the fact that I was 7 weeks pregnant and had just spent the last 3 hours doing exactly what I'd been trained to do, and that these 2 facts existed together in my life, whether or not that made sense to anyone else. The party had thinned out by the time I got back. Maybe 15 people left, clustered in the kitchen and the living room. My father-in-law was sitting in his favorite chair by the window looking pleasantly tired. Nathan was at the kitchen table with his brother and 2 neighbors. My mother-in-law was doing the thing she does at the end of parties where she starts collecting dishes in a way that signals to guests that the evening is concluding. She looked up when I came in through the back door. "Audrey," she said, in that tone. The one that meant, "I see you. I'm cataloging this." "Sorry," I said. "Work. On a Saturday." She set a stack of dessert plates on the counter and looked at me for a moment with that particular expression, the one I'd seen for 5 years, the one that said she hadn't decided what I was yet but the decision wasn't going to be favorable. "Dolores asked about you after you left," she said. I didn't know what to tell her. "You could have told her I had to handle something," I said. "I told her you were conscientious about your work," she said in a voice that made conscientious sound like a diagnosis. I got a glass of water and went to sit with Nathan. He squeezed my hand under the table. His brother asked me something about the drive back from wherever I'd been, vague enough that Nathan had clearly kept the details appropriately thin. And I answered vaguely back, and the conversation moved on. I didn't know, at that point, that the next morning was going to change everything. I found out the way most people find out about things now, through my phone. Early, before I was fully awake. Nathan was still asleep. I'd gotten up at 5:30 because I couldn't stay under, which happens after operational days, my body's way of making sure the debrief is complete. I was in the kitchen with coffee when the notification came through. Not from my agency. From Nathan's brother, who had texted, "Is that Audrey on the news?" I turned on the television. There is a particular experience of watching yourself on a screen that I can only describe as a delay. Like your brain needs an extra second to connect the image to the self. The footage was from a parking structure camera, not ours, a city traffic monitoring camera on a neighboring building. It had captured the three of us moving through the structure, and while the angle wasn't ideal and our faces weren't fully visible, whoever had obtained the footage and put it on air had done enough digging to confirm one of our names. Mine. The reporter was talking about a federal operation targeting a financial network with suspected connections to domestic extremist groups. She was talking about the hotel. She was talking about the outcome. She was getting probably 60% of the details right, which is more than usual and more than I was comfortable with. My phone rang. It was my supervisor. We talked for 4 minutes and 40 seconds, mostly him talking and me listening and confirming. Then I texted Nathan's brother, "Yes, but I can't talk about it right now." Then I sat on the couch and watched the segment run a second time. They used my name. My agency-level title, which most people wouldn't recognize but which any of Nathan's family who looked it up would start to understand. There was a photograph, my official ID photo, which I have no idea how it was obtained, and a brief biographical note that included my military service and my current position. They did not use the word security guard. I heard Nathan's alarm go off upstairs, then the sound of him moving around, then the stairs, and then he appeared in the doorway of the living room in a t-shirt and sweatpants, hair uneven from sleep, and he looked at the television and then at me. "Audrey," he said. I know. He came and sat next to me on the couch. We watched the segment. He didn't say anything for a while. "Yesterday," he finally said. "Yes." "When you left the party?" "Yes." He looked at the television a moment longer. Then he looked at me. "Are you okay? Not why didn't you tell me? Not what is happening, not even I can't believe this. Just, are you okay?" I love him for that. I have loved him for that for years without knowing exactly how to say it. "I'm okay," I said. "Things are going to get complicated for a few days. There'll be people who want to talk to me. I may need to have some conversations I can't fully explain." He nodded. "Okay. It's going to be strange." "It's already strange," he said and looked at the TV again. "Your mother-in-law is going to have a lot of feelings about this." "I know. She's going to pretend she knew," he said. "She's going to say she always knew there was more to it." I almost laughed. She absolutely is. She called the Lauras this morning. I guarantee it. I did laugh that time. Small and a little breathless, but real. His phone buzzed on the coffee table. Then again. Then mine. Then both at the same time. His family, working through their group texts the way they do. "Don't respond to anyone yet," I said. "Let me make a few calls first." He held up his hands, understood. I went into the bedroom and closed the door and spent the next hour on the phone with my supervisor, with legal, with the public affairs contact who walked me through what I could and could not confirm if asked directly. Standard procedure for a situation like this, though the particular circumstances, the footage, the photo, the timing, were less standard than any of us would have liked. When I came back out, Nathan had made eggs. He put a plate in front of me without comment. His mother called at 9:47. I could hear her voice from across the table when he answered. I couldn't make out specific words, but I know that voice in every register and I could hear the registers she was in, recalibrating, trying to figure out what she'd missed and how to position herself relative to what she now knew. Nathan was patient with her. He said the right things. He confirmed that yes, Audrey works for a federal agency. No, she wasn't able to discuss specifics. Yes, she was fine. Yes, he was fine. Yes, he was fine. No, there wasn't anything to worry about. When he hung up, he looked at me across the table. "She said she always thought you seemed very capable," he said. I took a bite of eggs. "High praise," I said, coming from her genuinely. He was right. Coming from her. Capable was a significant upgrade. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an acknowledgement that she'd spent 5 years of Sunday dinners treating me like a well-meaning underachiever who had somehow gotten her son to marry her. It wasn't any of the things I might have, in a different version of myself, wanted her to say. But I don't need her to understand what I do or why I do it. I never needed her to. There's a thing that happens sometimes in my work where you're in a situation that is genuinely high stakes. The kind where the margin for error is very small and the consequences of getting it wrong are significant. And what you find is that the training takes over. You stop performing competence and you just are competent. The decision-making becomes faster because you've removed the layer of self-consciousness that slows most people down in difficult moments. I've always thought that's true in regular life too, not just operational situations. The moment you stop needing someone to tell you that you're good at something, you get considerably better at it. The moment you stop needing the people who underestimated you to revise their estimation, the estimation stops mattering. My mother-in-law said she works security. She meant it as a dismissal. She meant it to place me in a category of people she didn't need to take seriously. And at the time, I smiled and excused myself to the bathroom and stood there breathing for 4 minutes. Not because I was hurt, but because the instinct to correct her was so strong that I needed a moment to put it back in its container. I'm glad I didn't correct her. She corrected herself, eventually, the way things usually go if you're patient enough. 11 days after the party, I told Nathan about the pregnancy. We were sitting in the same spot on the same couch, same television off this time. Evening light coming through the window at the angle that makes the living room look warmer than it actually is. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he put his face in his hands. Not upset, I could tell from the set of his shoulders, just overwhelmed in the way that good news can be overwhelming when you're not expecting it. Then he looked up. 7 weeks, he said. 7 weeks, I said. So when you were at the party? 7 weeks? He looked at me, this long, complicated look that contained about 40 different things, and then he started laughing. Not polite laughing. Real laughing, the kind that takes over. I started laughing too. My mother is going to be so confused, he managed. About what to feel, I said. There's going to be a lot of recalibration. She's going to want to be involved. She can be involved, I said. In the things that are hers to be involved in. He reached over and took my hand. Held it. You're going to be an extraordinary mother, he said. Not because of the news coverage. Not because of the operation. Not because of anything that anyone else could see. Because he knows me, the actual version, not the one that gets introduced at retirement parties as a security guard. And that's the thing that makes it mean something. The work continues. It always does. I can't talk about most of it, and that's fine, because I never needed anyone's permission to do it well. But sometimes, when I'm in the middle of a long surveillance rotation or sitting in a conference room at 6 in the morning going over materials that I can't take home, I think about that parking structure camera. The footage, the news segment, my name on television above a photograph that showed me looking like exactly what I am. Not just anything, just exactly what I am. I've thought a lot about why I never corrected her, not once in 5 years. Part of it was professional. There are things I genuinely cannot say, and I learned early that the cleanest way to protect information is to say as little as possible rather than to construct elaborate half-truths. But part of it was something else. Something I didn't fully understand until I was sitting on my couch watching my own face on the morning news. When someone decides what you are before they know you, correcting them rarely changes the decision. It just creates an argument. My mother-in-law had a version of me that she'd built from the first dinner Nathan brought me home. A version that was incomplete, convenient, a little dismissive, and she'd been furnishing that version for 5 years. No single conversation was going to renovate it. What actually changed things was reality arriving on its own terms, in its own time, in a way she couldn't manage or reframe. That's not a passive thing, though. That's not just waiting. The reason reality arrived the way it did was because I kept doing the work. I showed up when it mattered. I made the call in that parking lot. I drove 11 minutes from a retirement party and did what I'd been trained to do. Not because anyone was watching. And not because I needed the outcome to reflect well on me, in front of the right people. Because it needed to be done and I was the person there to do it. Integrity is mostly invisible. That's the thing nobody tells you when you're young. You build it in the moments nobody sees. The decision you make when you're tired, when it would be easier to let it slide, when there's no audience and no reward. And then one day a parking structure camera picks up something it wasn't meant to see and suddenly all those invisible moments have a shape. I think about Dolores a lot, actually. This woman I'd never met, who was told at a party that I work security, who probably went home and mentioned me in passing to someone. The daughter-in-law, sweet enough, works security, you know how it is. and then woke up the next morning and saw the news. I think about what that recalibration feels like, not because I need her to feel it, but because it's a useful reminder that most of the judgments people make about us are made with incomplete information, and most of the time we'll never get the moment where the record gets set straight so publicly. Most of the time you just have to know what you are and keep moving. Nathan knew, not the details, he couldn't, but the shape of it, the fact that my irregular hours weren't irresponsibility, that my silences weren't evasion, that the woman he married was exactly who he thought she was, even when he couldn't prove it to anyone else. That kind of trust, offered without proof, maintained without explanation, is the hardest thing to earn and the thing I'm most grateful for. I'm going to be someone's mother. That changes the stakes in ways I'm still working through. But it doesn't change the core of it. What I want to pass on isn't a title or a news segment or a moment of public recognition. It's the habit of doing the right thing when no one is looking. The discipline to stay quiet when you could be loud. The confidence to know your own value without needing anyone else to announce it. The work continues. It always does. And I'll keep showing up for it, not for the cameras and not for anyone's revised opinion of me. Just because it matters. Just because I'm the person there to do it.